time. Hello, hello, hello. We are live. How you doing,
Hi,
guys?
Hi.
Right, as people are joining the session, I'll make a quick introduction. We are here today with Tony Leake, and I'll leave a full introduction to him very, very shortly. But it's the Blam Partners InnerCircle Facebook Live group, exclusive today for all our partners all over the world. We get people signing in from South Africa. We get people signing in from the USA, from Canada, and further afield as well. UK, Ireland, Australia. We're in over 9 different countries. It's going to be quite an interactive session today, guys. Grant's going to do the interview with Tony. Tony's going to tell us a little bit about how he's got to where he is today and what he does for people. But feel free to ask questions. If you're watching this on a rerun or on a recording, we do monitor the comments, so please just drop the comments below. And while you're there, give us a quick like and please subscribe for any future updates. Peter Blantanis is here. I'm going to go and disappear in the background, leave you guys to it, and we'll see you towards the end.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. Excellent. And so, Tony, welcome. Absolute pleasure to have you here at Blam Partners InnerCircle. Just to get things started, your area of expertise is anxiety, dealing with anxiety.
Yes, it is.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you to become an expert in that area?
Yeah, thanks, Grant. And that's probably a good place to be starting, actually, because 12 years ago, life was very different to how it is now. 12 years ago, I'd been a software developer, and I'd worked my way up to the chain until I was technical director of a small online retail company. Something I'd always wanted to do. I'd always wanted to get to that level. But you know yourself, Grant, when you push yourself in business, a lot of things come with that. A lot of stresses and strains. And my experience was probably the same as you've probably experienced it, and a lot of your readers listeners will have, that I was working too hard. And what that meant for me at the time was I was getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I was at my desk at 5:15 in the morning after having a quick cup of coffee. And most days I'd still be sitting there at 5:30 at night, and I'd probably only stop for a few minutes during the day. At the time, I'd got 2 young children under 5, and round about that time, my dad died very suddenly. So there was a lot going on in life, as a lot of people have. And then one day I was sitting at home, working from home, nobody else around, and I started to feel a little bit unwell. Very quickly, that became feeling very unwell, and I was getting pains in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I was getting dizzy. I was getting tightness in my arms. And you're probably guessing what was going through my head at this point. Oh, yeah. So I stood up because I thought I need to tell someone, I need to get to the phone. As I stood up, I collapsed on the floor, and I was there for about 10 minutes. I couldn't move. Wow. Eventually, I got hold of the phone, and I dialed 999 and said, I think I'm having a heart attack. I need an ambulance. Mm-hmm. It took probably about 10 minutes for the ambulance to get there. And for the whole of that time, the only thought that went through my mind was, who's going to tell my children their dad's dead? Mm-hmm. Because I was convinced that I wasn't going to be alive by the time the ambulance had arrived. Luckily, I wasn't having a heart attack, but nobody told me that. And then I started experiencing the same things over and over again for a period. It went on for a couple of years. I was in and out of hospital. I was in A&E out there. I was taken in and out. I had every test going. But what nobody ever told me was that what I was experiencing was not a heart attack. It was a panic attack.
So did you think it was a heart attack all that time?
All of that time, every time this happened, I was convinced I was having a heart attack.
Oh, God.
For about 2 years. So many days I was convinced I was on my last day. And I lived like that. And you know what, Grant? A lot of people live like that, not knowing that they're experiencing panic attacks, because I don't understand how the doctors didn't pick up on this, because it's got to be well known that the symptoms are very similar. But nobody picked up on it.
Oh my God! And so how did it come about that you found out that it was a panic attack rather than a heart attack?
Well, they kept telling me there was nothing wrong with my heart. I had every test known to man, which is brilliant. I mean, I've got great medical attention. And they just kept telling me there was nothing wrong with my heart. And eventually, through my own research, I figured out for myself it was a panic.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
God, that's unbelievable. You'd have thought they'd have, given you the information.
That's what I would have thought. But yeah, for whatever reason, it never happened. It never happened.
And so did you carry on working throughout that period?
I carried on working, but they did come a point where it was clear that being in that particular job was causing a lot of the stresses that I was under. So got a very understanding wife, and we decided that I was gonna quit that line of work. And I'd started training as a therapist at the time, because I was training as a therapist to help myself. And in order to do that, I had to be working with other people as practice clients. And as I was working with them, I figured out actually I'm pretty good at this and I like doing this. So I left my career in IT, dropped dead, and went into probably actually drop dead's not a very good.
I was going to say.
Talking about, walked out of that career into and started a new career.
Wow! So your journey of helping people with anxiety is very deeply rooted in your own experience, and I guess it was a bit of a calling.
Yeah, Grant, my initial idea once I left work was I was going to save the world from stress. I didn't realize that was too big a thing to be doing at the time. And actually, a lot of the world doesn't want rescuing from stress, but that was my initial goal when I set out.
So when you started doing your training as a therapist, what kind of therapy were you training?
The original thing was I trained in something called EFT, emotional freedom technique.
Oh, know that very well.
Yeah, the tapping stuff. And it's really good. It's so powerful.
My wife's a TFT specialist.
Gotcha. Yeah, and EFT grew out of TFT, which you'll know.
Right. Yeah, Roger Callahan.
Absolutely, yes. For anyone who doesn't know what it is, EFT and TFT, it's tapping on different parts of your body. The kind of places that the Chinese would call meridian points, and it's incredibly powerful. It's very, very effective. But what I was doing at the time, I wanted to get into the boardrooms of companies, and I wanted to be getting to people at that sort of level, and they just they're not going to take this tapping on your head seriously. And I get that. I was talking to the wrong audience. So from there, I did a diploma in stress management. I trained as a hypnotherapist next.
Okay, hypnotherapy as well.
Yeah, that's where a lot of my tools come from. But then I trained in something called NLP, Neuro-Linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Across that as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm an NLP master practitioner.
How are you? Okay. Wow.
Much of what I do now is a combination of NLP and hypnotherapy. So I class myself more not as a coach, not as a therapist. I bring both of the skills to the table, and I think that's what it takes to get a lasting solution for most people.
And so you said that you originally were looking at people sort of boardroom level. Who's your kind of typical customer now?
Well, that's changed a lot over the years. I've changed the offering over the years. That I work with a lot of business people. But I always say, Grant, that anxiety doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're the janitor or the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
You're just as likely to be affected. Anxiety doesn't care what your job title is or how much you earn. You can be affected by it. And I know that's true because I've worked with school teachers, I've worked with a school caretaker, and I've worked with millionaire business owners. I've worked with CEOs of international organizations. These days, on the coaching side of things, it does tend to be fairly senior business owners and fairly senior people in business. People who come to me more as a therapist, then it can be anybody, the man in the street. And I do a small amount of work. I have a client, a FTSE 250 client, who they get me working with a lot of their senior managers. So it's across the board, really, Grant. It's
and I think that it's really fascinating the fact that you've got this broad spectrum of skills, across different disciplines, because my wife's a therapist. My wife's a music therapist.
Is she? Interesting.
And she's also a TFT practitioner, but she's extremely knowledgeable about all the different NLP and whatnot, because she's worked with so many different forms of therapy. And there's a bit of a stigma, isn't there, around people having therapy, and quite often it can almost be out of desperation that people look for a therapist of whatever description. What would be your sort of advice if anybody's starting to feel those anxiety symptoms?
If people are starting to feel the anxiety symptoms, I'd say do something about it, because you're absolutely right. People don't generally come to me because they're feeling a bit anxious. People come to me at 2 points: one just before they fall off the cliff, and the second is just after they've fallen off the cliff.
Yeah.
And sadly, a lot of it's preventable.
Yeah, and I was saying it's weird that we're having this conversation. I used to go to acupuncture.
Cool. Yeah.
And I used to say to my wife, when I went to acupuncture, originally I went to it for years ago when we were having kids, for fertility reasons, to help with fertility, and it actually worked. Completely different conversation. If anybody wants to know about that, we'll talk about that another time. But I carried on doing it after I had kids because it felt like therapy in a way, because I'd sit there and talk about the way I was feeling. And it's kind of, you go through that process. And recently a friend of mine has been having some issues, and I recommended acupuncture to start with, and he had the same experience, that having that conversation to begin with, but he's now gone on to NLP, and he's had plenty of TFT as well to help with his issues. But this again, like we were saying, this sort of, it was almost out of desperation. And I was saying to Abby at the weekend, do you know what? I want to go start having acupuncture again, just because it's a nice thing to do.
Yeah, it really is. And you've just hit on a nail that is really important here, because you've just talked about something that's in a lot of ways taboo to talk about. Me and my wife went through fertility treatment as well, because and guess what? Once we moved out of London, we stopped being less stressed. We were able to have children. But going for fertility treatment is kind of a taboo subject. People don't talk about it, and people need to talk about it. One of the reasons that people live with anxiety too long is because they don't talk about it, because it's a taboo subject. Yeah. I heard something recently, and when I hear conversations like this, I want to stick my fingers in people's eyes and tell them to wake up. There was a conversation going on at quite a high level in a big company around mental health. And one of the very senior managers said, when can we stop talking about this? Have we not done this yet? And I've heard people ask me, is anxiety actually real, or are people just making it up to get a day off work? And we need to be having those kind of conversations that actually know that isn't the case at all.
Well, it can be so debilitating, can't it? And I mean, what's your take, Tony, on the lockdown? Because it strikes me that there's a bit of an epidemic at the moment of people with mental health difficulties, anxiety, agoraphobia, as a result of I hear about it all the time. What's your take on that?
I think lockdown probably stimulated something that was maybe underlying in a lot of people. So there's different kinds of anxiety. Some of it's very generalized, some of it is very specific. If people are anxious because they've been locked up in their house for too long, then maybe that's going to go away once they start going out again. The more generalized anxiety doesn't tend to go away on its own. Right. So I'm just trying to read the questions on the screen at the moment. I'm not very good at multitasking.
Yeah. So. Why is it so hard for people to admit that they are struggling with anxiety?
I think possibly because of the stigma around it, Peter. I have to be very careful when I'm talking about clients, because the most important thing to anybody is confidentiality. And I'm thinking about a particular client that I worked with a while ago who was a senior business owner and had investors in the business, and he was absolutely frightened to death that anyone would find out that he was struggling with panic attacks, because he was worried that the investors would walk away. And it's that thought of, what might other people think of us? Will people judge us on it? And it just makes it hard, because we don't want to be judged. Nobody likes to be judged.
No. I mean, we talk about this a lot with David Rahman, who's a guy, the mind coach. I don't know if you've come across him. He's a guy that we talk to quite a lot here.
Okay.
And it comes up all the time, this fear of what other people think of us.
Yeah.
You know, and particularly when we're in business, because we want to put this this, for the want of a better word, this facade that everything, we're in control, everything's okay.
Yeah.
You know, and because we want people to have confidence in us as business owners. But I mean, I've had my own experiences with this as well, and I talk about it quite openly to the partners. Way back when I first started in business and I was doing presentations and cold calling, I used to get panic attacks. And it was quite random when it used to happen, and really confusing and embarrassing. You know, it's an embarrassing thing to have to admit.
Yes, it is.
You know.
Yeah. When I was experiencing this myself, I used to get comments like, "I'll pass the paper bag. Tony's having one of his things again," you know, and it makes it really hard then if people are kind of making fun of it. And I think it was probably meant in humor. I don't think there was anything more than, but even so, when you're going through something that, when you're scared that you think you're going to die and people are making fun of you, it's really not a good thing to be happening.
No. Oh God. And that's, I remember, I set about trying to cure my issue. And it came down to what I just said, that fear of what other people think. So
Yes.
If I was doing a presentation, you know, public speaking, you know, it's that fear of what people are thinking of you.
It is. Something one of my friends, Graham Cozier, always says that is so true. It's not what you think about yourself that affects you. It's not what other people think about you that affects you. It's what you think that other people are thinking about you that affects you. And he's just so bang on the nail with that, isn't he? There's a question from Shelley that I'm going to come back to in a moment. But then, if we may, after that, I'd like to come back to actually what anxiety is, because there's a lot of misapprehension around that.
Brilliant. Yeah. Cool.
So Shelley's asking the question, do I do cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or purely hypnosis and NLP? Shelley, I'm not a CBT practitioner. I've read several books on it, and I think it's a very good form of therapy, and for some people it's the right form of therapy. CBT deals with things at a cognitive level, and a lot of anxiety happens at a cognitive level, but at the same time a lot of problems occur at an emotional level. If a problem occurs at an emotional level, then CBT is probably not the right therapy for it. Something like hypnosis or NLP is probably a better approach. But yeah, CBT I say I'm not a CBT therapist, but it's a very good, very solid approach.
So somebody's asked about hypnotherapy. How does hypnotherapy work to treat anxiety?
Okay, so what I do with hypnotherapy now is very different to what I did 10 years ago, because I've learned a huge amount during those times. The way I use hypnotherapy is simply to reduce symptoms as quickly as possible. That is, number one goal is always to reduce symptoms as quickly as possible. And then once we've done that, it's about finding out what caused it in the first place. What is the root cause of this? Something that I'm really against is a strong word. Something that I really don't like is finding coping mechanisms for anxiety. And the example I always like to use is if you've got a damp patch on your wall, you can paint over it to mask it, or you can take the plaster out and put the plaster back on again. But if there's a broken pipe in the wall that's leaking, that's dripping out water, the problem's going to come back every single time. And this is something that I found a lot when I set out. Everybody who came to see me went away, quote, cured, and they told me they were feeling amazing, because put me in a room with anybody with any level of anxiety, even extreme anxiety, in 1 hour, I'll get them walking out feeling better than they came in. But that's not cured any problems.
Right. It's just a plaster.
That's the plaster. So what the hypnosis these days is, for me, mostly, not entirely, but mostly, is about reducing the symptoms so that then we can start to figure out what is causing the problem. And then once we've found out what's causing the problem, figuring out what the solution is. And the solution's different for every single person.
Awesome.
Something that is really important to me is treating the person, not treating the label. There's a big kind of tendency for, you can get books of hypnotherapy scripts and people, and I've done this myself when I started off. Someone comes with anxiety, so you turn to page 97, how do you cure anxiety? And you're just working with a label, you're not working with the person. And all that anxiety is a label. It's nothing, it doesn't exist. Anxiety doesn't exist. It's not, you don't get anxiety because your anxious gland's inflamed, because there is no anxious gland. It's just a label. It's a label that we apply to the way that we're feeling, or the way that we're thinking at the time.
It's interesting, isn't it, to look at it like that, because anxiety can be so debilitating and most awful feeling, and really, it's nothing but your own brain, thinking of stuff. It's that the whole thing about fear, isn't it? What's the analogy for fear now, or the anagram? It's
false evidence appearing real.
Evidence appearing real. That's it. Yeah.
And it is, and Grant, a lot of it's the story that we tell ourselves. But what happens most of the time, we tell ourselves the story so often that we don't even hear that we're saying it anymore. So a lot of the value that I can bring to people, I listen to the stories that they're telling themselves, and then I can show them back what they're actually saying. Then we can look at look at the underlying beliefs in what they're saying, and once they've got that, then they start to challenge their own beliefs. Well, actually, is this true? Is it true that I have to be a perfectionist? Is it true that it matters what people think about me?
Shelley saying, how did you start controlling your panic attacks initially?
That's a great question, Shelley. And for me, breathing exercises was the number one thing. And I still say that's the number one thing. I still have a bit of a bone about this, because the breathing exercise that I always teach people is something called 7-11 breathing. And I'm not going to explain how to do it. I could explain in 2 minutes how to do it. But the problem with this is it creates a sticking plaster approach of, in 2 minutes, people will understand how to do it. They'll go away and they'll do it, and they'll get a little bit of relief from it, but only a little bit. And in 2 days, they'll have forgotten they ever learned it in the first place. So in my online anxiety program, the first lesson is 90 minutes long. And we spend most of that talking about a breathing exercise, because you have to understand why you're doing it. You have to understand what's going on in your body when you do it, what's going on in your brain, and how to make it a long-term habit rather than something that you just do once or twice. But breathing exercises, definitely. Get mindfulness as well for anybody who's experiencing any kind of anxious thoughts or feelings. Mindfulness, again, I'm not a mindfulness practitioner, but it's the place to start. It really is. And a couple of other things. So I've got a couple of books here as well that I'd recommend to absolutely everybody. This is called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff by Richard Carlson.
Okay.
You heard of this, Grant?
I've heard of that book, yeah.
This has been on the bestseller list for over 20 years. There's a really good reason for it. And it's not a manual on how to run your brain, but it's maybe as close as you're going to get to one. Each chapter in this, it's a very small book. Each chapter's 1 or 2 pages. And it's really thought-provoking stuff. Just start every day by reading one chapter of this, keep it on your mind, and it gets you in the right place to start out the day. Same kind of Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah.
There's, again, for anyone who doesn't know it, there's about 50 books in this series. This has sold hundreds of millions of books for good reason. Again, 1 or 2 pages long, and it's all about good things about human nature, things that people overcome, the acts of kindness and stuff like that. And it's just all feel good stuff, isn't it, Grant? it's hard to read it and not feel good, isn't it?
That's it. It's all about, you know, being a good person, human nature, all the stuff that, you know, celebrating life.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely,
and
it is.
all good stuff in it.
And start your day like that, because as you go through your day, we're surrounded by negativity, aren't we? This is your flu shot. This is inoculating you against that. We've got to fill our heads with positive. And I'm not all about positive thinking, but we do have to take a lot of it on board.
In fact, the book I'm reading at the moment is From Homeless to Billionaire, I think it's called. And he quotes that book all the time. And the guy who wrote the book, what's his name? What's the name of the guy who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul?
It's Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen.
That's it. That's Jack Canfield. Yeah, he's one of this guy's mentors, and he's all about you know, just celebrating like the little things, and you know, always thinking positively, and and he's a big one for that law of attraction, affirmations, you know, goal setting, all of that kind of stuff. And you know, we love all that stuff here. You know, we go on about it with the guys all the time.
Yep. And again, you've just absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Grant. If people want to overcome anxiety, and I think I might have said it earlier, or I might have just said it to you before we came on the air. I don't believe in learning to manage anxiety or learning to live with the symptoms of it. If you had a broken leg, you wouldn't want to manage that. You wouldn't want to live with the symptoms of that. You'd want to get over it. So why not do the same with anxiety? And the way to do that, or one of the ways, is set a goal. Make it a project that you're going to overcome that anxiety. Write a project plan. Right where you are now, where you want to get to, and then go out, do your study, do your research, figure out what you need to do to move through that project, and get obsessed about it.
So Peter's asked, what are the 3 top signs that anxiety has entered the door?
That's such a hard question to answer, Peter, because everybody experiences different things. Very common things are changing moods. Mood swings is often there. Changing sleep patterns is often there. Overthinking is almost always there. Worrying, we'll all worry about things from time to time, and it's okay. But if you find yourself worrying for 3 hours at a time and you can't stop, or you find that you're worrying every single day, then that's too much. Another very common one, we call it, it's got a couple of names, we call it catastrophizing or awfulizing, also known as just jumping to the worst possible conclusion. And the kind of things that people experience, like their partner's 10 minutes late home from work and they're imagining lying them dead in a ditch somewhere because they've had a car accident, or they get a headache and suddenly it's a brain tumor, and it's just jumping to the worst possible conclusions. So these are some of the common signs and symptoms, but there is so many.
It's a broad church, isn't it?
It really
I think
is.
from, you know, to sort of you know, to finish off, acknowledging that you're suffering from anxiety and doing something about it is the key, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I would change one word in that, from suffering to experiencing, because we've got to minimize the size of the problem in our brain. So yeah, it's something we're experiencing currently, and we've got to use that word currently, because there is life on the other side of the wall. Anxiety, I've been there, and people can get over it. People do get over it.
Do you ever, Tony, do you ever find yourself slipping back into anxious frame of mind?
Yes, but what happens is, and this happened not long ago. I woke up in the middle of the night and my wife wasn't in bed. And my first thought was, what's happened if she's dead downstairs? Literally, that came into my head. But this time, instead of worrying about that for an hour, within about 3 or 4 seconds, I went, hang on a minute, I'm just making up a story here. And I changed my thinking. And then just went downstairs and found out she'd fallen asleep in front of the TV.
So there are a million questions for you, and I've really loved this session. I really have, and thank you so much, Tony, for your valuable time with us. There's been value all the way along. I've got one question. and how much how much of this is actually learned behavior?
Oh, this is can of worms here, Edward, because I'm going to say all of it, but I have to be very careful. I normally create loads and loads of rapport with people before I say this, and so apologies to any of your listeners. Please don't take offense from this, but we create our own anxiety. I created my own anxiety, and that doesn't mean that anybody's to blame for it. In the same way, if I pick up a heavy object and I do my backing because I didn't know any better, it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm broken in any way. It just means I need to learn not to do that again. And we create our anxiety generally by the way that we think in. And that doesn't mean that anybody's mad, bad, or broken. It just means you need to learn a different way to think.
And it is therefore also a process. And really, the biggest takeaway for me is to set that goal and to make a plan, because that's what it's all about. And then action will cure a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, man.
Good.
It's awesome. Can I get a bit emotional? I'm going to say it.
Good. Yeah.
So where can people get a hold of you, Tony?
Yes.
Thank you. People can get hold of me on my website at tonyleake.com. Leake is spelled Leake. Or they can email me at tony@tonyleake.com. Or if people still are old-fashioned like me and use phones, my number's 07905 495 202.
Brilliant.
We love the phone.
I will drop the links in the chat. I guess you're also on LinkedIn. You're on
LinkedIn.
YouTube. You got a YouTube channel?
I have. There's not that much on there. There's quite a few videos on my website. Yeah, but the videos are not about anxiety. The videos about how to live a great life, because that's what we do. Once we get past anxiety, then we start living a great life.
That's the message we're going to close with it. On that fantastic ending. Let's go make it happen.
Thanks, Edward. Tony. Absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Stay in the chat, Tony. We'll just wrap up. Thank you for watching. This is the Blam Partners InnerCircle Facebook Live, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 4 p.m.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Bye.